Today's guest has built a thriving law firm in the heart of Manhattan, guiding people through some of the most emotionally and financially intense moments of their lives. Jeff Kaplan is not just a top-tier family law attorney, he is a strategist, a negotiator, and a witness to what happens when money, power, and relationships collide. In this conversation, we dive into his own path, how he built this firm, stayed grounded, and learned to lead under pressure. Then we zoom out to the patterns he sees in love, conflict, and what actually matters when things fall apart. If you're building wealth, navigating big relationships, or just want to sharpen your perspective, this one's for you. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Leo. It's fantastic to be here, and I thank you so much for this opportunity to tell you and anyone else a little bit about myself, my firm, and what it is that we do.
So, part one, I want to just learn a little bit more and tell the audience about the man behind the firm. Who Jeff is and how you built your law firm.
Sure.
First off, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jeff Kaplan. I am the founder and managing partner of J. Kaplan and Associates. We are a Midtown Manhattan-based domestic relations law, matrimonial, divorce, if you will, and family law firm, handling every aspect of divorce and or family law in the New York State Supreme Courts and the New York family courts that you can possibly conceive of: financial issues, custody issues, trial issues. We're a full-scale shop. I have several associates who work with me, and we handle everything from prenuptial agreements right through trial and even post-judgment enforcement of orders if necessary. We also have a thriving appellate practice in the event that there's a need to defend or to bring an appeal for any reason following a judgment or an order.
So you've spent decades guiding people through some of the hardest chapters of their lives. Now, what did the early chapters of your story look like? What made you choose family law, or did it choose you?
I think the way you expressed it, the latter part there, is probably more accurate. I started as an attorney approximately 30 years ago, and my path, or my journey, if you will, was a little bit different. I didn't initially expect or have as part of my desired path to become a matrimonial attorney, but I actually started in criminal defense, and I was working for a small law firm at the time, which two prosecutors had started. They were former violent felony crime prosecutors, so they had been with the district attorney's office in the community where I started for about 15, 20 years, trying all sorts of serious criminal cases, and they were very, very good lawyers and very, very good trial lawyers. And I had the good fortune to wander into their office, and they gave me an opportunity to work for them, and that was how it all began. After, I'd say, approximately 6 or 7 years of working with them, I had really gained a tremendous amount of experience in the private criminal defense world. And that necessarily involved representing a lot of individuals who were facing allegations involving domestic violence and assaults. And in some cases, it involved, their significant others, whether it be a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or what have you. And it naturally led to a lot of appearances and dealing with family offense petitions and the like. And that also naturally lent itself to people inquiring about whether or not I would represent them in their divorces, which oftentimes follows any sort of a domestic situation. And that's really how I started. It started that way, and I started to help people out through the process of divorcing, and I found that I had a real knack and an affinity for it. I enjoyed it. I liked the lawyers that I dealt with. I liked helping clients out with their custody or financial decisions, and some of those problems and issues that they face can be quite involved because it really involves a very emotional component. Having been, in the criminal defense world for many years, I was used to that, used to high pressure situations, used to being in court all the time, used to conducting trials and things of that nature. And I really think that I had the tools and the aptitude from my early experiences as a criminal defense attorney to really have a knack and an understanding for conducting hearings, which are very common in divorce situations and family court situations. And it naturally became a path that I enjoyed following, and I did. I followed it to where we are today, and here we are as a thriving Manhattan-based matrimonial and family law firm.
So you touched on a few interesting points. It seems like in your journey, dealing with what you dealt with back in the criminal defense side, you sort of found a few characteristics that you enjoyed more out of working there, and then you decided to say, how do I do more of this? And that's sort of when you transitioned to family law. But I think, as with any surface level decision, it sounds like it makes perfect sense. It sounds like it must have been a very smooth transition, but in reality, was that the case?
Sure. I will very easily summarize, and I would imagine most matrimonial or family lawyers would agree with me that there's nothing easy about what we do. It is a very complicated and intricate profession involving a lot of details, a lot of moving parts, a lot of very, very heightened emotions. So, yeah, it's no easy path. Well, that is not really a reason not to follow that path. I think the positives that come out of those types of experiences are probably what guided me and had me follow this path as enthusiastically as I have over the years. Those things involve, I like the stories. I like, every case or every issue that comes up in a case really has to have an explanation and a story. And I like stories. I like to read stories. I like to watch stories, and I like to be a part of real stories. And I think it fascinated me early on when clients would come into me, and really the way any client relationship starts, especially in a matrimonial situation, is, well, tell me your story. Tell me why you're here. Tell me what the problem is or what the issue is or what you need to do. And it usually ends with, after I've listened to all the facts of the story, with me, giving my opinion and my advice and applying the facts of the story that I've been told to the law, the domestic relations law or the family court law that I know, and giving the client my opinion about what I think is a path forward, what I believe, in my opinion, is the best way out of a bad situation, or how to deal with a bad situation on the other side if you're faced with that. And my attraction, even in light of a lot of challenges that this profession throws at you, is again that story and helping people through, a story, and hopefully maybe a story that starts out not so nice ends on a high note. So maybe there's a happy ending, and that's an attractive part of the profession for me. Again, even facing what otherwise is a very emotional type of practice, I really enjoy it.
I like that. So it seems like you're more driven by the people aspect of it and helping people learning their stories and sort of figuring out how to piece the puzzle together and how to sort of best move your clients forward. What do you think your career has taught you about negotiation and power, especially when emotions are running high? How do you disarm tense situations? Was there specific stories that just stuck with you, maybe about empathy or other valuable life lessons?
Well, a couple of different things, or tools, if you will, that I use in my profession. And certainly I'm not unique in that way. I think there are probably some other great lawyers that I've learned from, or stolen secrets from, if you will, and gained inspiration from. And when I say that, I mean not just good tools and good characteristics, but sort of things to avoid and certain things not to do. So learning is something that you take positives from, and learning is also something you learn to avoid the negatives of. So having been exposed, I've been doing this for approximately 30 years, to so many different types of lawyers, things that I've picked up along the way that really are, as far as I'm concerned, and things that I require and assist all of my associates to engage in when they're working with me. First and foremost is preparation. You have to be super, super, super prepared. You have to out prepare your adversary, no matter what, in all situations. And that doesn't always mean working harder or longer hours, but it means being really focused. You don't always have a lot of time to prepare. As a matter of fact, there are some situations where you have no time to prepare, yet you have to be prepared. So train yourself to use whatever time you have available to you as most efficiently as you possibly can to be prepared. Always be prepared. And I also encourage everyone to listen. And you find yourself in a lot of tense situations with an adversary, maybe even a judge, maybe even your own client in certain circumstances. Clients don't always like to receive bad news, but you're not really doing your client a service as an attorney if you're candy coating situations that they really need to hear. There are situations where you just unfortunately have to deliver bad news. What you did before you retained me was a bad thing, and now we have to deal with it. Don't candy coat that kind of thing, but it involves listening. And even when you're faced with an adversary who is, what I call a barking dog, or screaming, or might not be, totally in control with their own emotions. And I run into that occasionally. And there have even been a couple of times when I've gotten a little bit mouthy and maybe a little louder than I should. And I think it's normal, but the important thing is to reflect and listen. Listen to what your adversary is saying, because when people feel they're being listened to, I find that it creates in them, a calming effect. And, it's really a situation where, and even with lawyers, someone feels they're not being heard, that they raise their voice, or, they may say something that, is off color, or maybe they wish they hadn't said. So it's very important to listen very carefully, and not only listen to your adversaries, listen to yourself and what you're saying and how you're being perceived and how you're communicating. And you really learn that, and you become experienced after you've been doing this for a number of years, because, you really have to profile people. You really have to get to really know someone that you otherwise have never spoken to before, whether it's a judge you just before for the first time, or an adversary who you maybe don't get along so well with, but you guys are going to try a case, and you have to really feel that person out and understand, well, what's their personality like? What's the best way to approach this situation? And ultimately, the goal is so that you're benefiting your client in the best way that you possibly can, by being heard, by listening, by doing an amazing job for your client to the extent you're able to do that. And I really feel that you do that by listening. And that helps in so many ways. A lot of people don't listen. It's that simple. It's really good to listen.
It definitely is. People don't like to hear, but I think that listening is absolutely a superpower because for the reasons that you mentioned, you get so much out of listening. You can properly understand where people are coming from, what is driving them, what emotions, what goals are driving them. So when you understand them better, you have more context to make better decisions with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of what I was saying too. Something as simple as taking a deposition, which is just a question and answer session of a party in a lawsuit taken by the adverse lawyer. And there are so many instances where I'll be in a deposition and perhaps my client's being deposed, and I'm listening, I'm watching the lawyer, and a lot of times the lawyer's reading from a script. Questions have all been, prepared. And for whatever reason, maybe the lawyer has something else on their mind. They're not really paying attention. They're, okay, and what did you do next? And what happened? And, what color was the light, or whatever the question is. They're not listening to the answers. Just like you said, every answer that you're given in a situation, in a case, in a deposition, at trial, during a cross-examination is critical, because whatever that answer is, in most cases, it's probably going to generate a number of other questions. But if you're not listening, you're not learning, you're not paying attention, you're really just going to look back at your outline and ask the next question. And you may have missed something critical or important. And again, you're not really doing a decent job for your client if you're not listening. So super, super important for that. Absolutely.
I think it's fascinating that you say that as well because when quote unquote negotiations are happening, each side, I mean, the conventional knowledge is I'm going to prepare a one sheet. I want to put a lot of thought into this and just have like a cheat sheet of material to spit out at. But when you actually have the conversation, all it takes is two steps in the wrong direction and then you're completely off whatever you prepared for and then you're in uncharted territory and you're unprepared again. Back to what you were saying earlier, there are many situations that you have to act on your feet and prepare and have a good response with little to no preparation.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Of course, there's no substitute for experience, but I don't always like to say that or hear that, because, well, what happens if you're a new lawyer? You've only been doing this for a year. The only way you're going to get experience, obviously, is, going out and doing hearings or trials and working with clients and other lawyers and filing motions and arguing motions. And until you've had, a number of years, under your belt, you don't have what we call experience. So what you lack in experience, I think you can certainly make up with preparation. Prepare, your adversary who may have been doing this for years and is getting tired and just feels like, I don't have to prepare for this. I've asked these questions a million times. It's second nature to me. I really don't even have to listen to the answers because I've been doing this for too long. Those are all really not good ways to approach any situation. And I've actually seen lawyers get into trouble with that sort of thing. And I've seen some young individuals come up who don't have that experience and they're phenomenal lawyers. It's preparation.
Mm. It's funny that you say that because it immediately brings to mind in real estate. In my experience in brokerage, with a lot of other brokers, like they've been in the industry for 30, 40 years. They've been in it longer than I've been alive. And the funny part is that when they meet you, they're so quick to say, I've been selling homes for 40 years. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what's going on. Let me tell you how to solve it. And they just assume that they have all the answers. But
Yep.
when you assume, you sort of shut off the world to the possibilities. and you're not listening anymore.
I agree. You really have to be in tune with the situation. Like they say, life comes at you fast, things change in an instant. And maybe it's a situation you've never seen before, no matter how many years you've been, doing this. I've been doing this for approximately 30 years, and I am refreshed on occasion, and it's probably frequent occasion, with an issue that I've never been confronted with before. And to me, that's fascinating. And I want nothing more than I love corroboration and collaboration. I love getting together with my associates and trying to figure out how to address this new situation that's come up, because there are endless factual scenarios which result in just, again, an infinite number of issues that come up at any time. And every once in a while, you do face a completely novel issue, and it's just fascinating. So I love to call the team together, and we put our minds together and collectively come up with a solution, and listen and look at the situation from all different directions and angles. What would our adversary do? What will our adversary do? What will we do to counter that? Or what will we do to, if we have to, be the proponent of something to get an issue across the finish line? What will we do to be, the aggressor, or the individual will have to file a motion and seek certain relief, that sort of thing.
I think you've touched on a lot of great frameworks on how you approach issues at hand, how you think on your feet and are adaptable. And I think it's really applicable to business. So I'm curious, on the business side, what did you learn about building your business as you built it? Was there like mistakes or like turning points that stand out in your earlier years? How did you navigate through that?
Well, the interesting thing about business, especially, and obviously I'm a lawyer, so I'll give you the perspective from that of a lawyer. Everyone, I believe, thinks that you're going to graduate from law school, you're going to have your law degree, you're going to pass the bar exam, and then you're a lawyer. And they like to say, we're going to hang out my shingle, and people are just going to, beat my door down, and run to me, and the line will be down the street and around the corner for people to hire my law firm and have me represent them. And I'm going to be rewarded with the riches of the world from all that, and so on and so forth. Well, first of all, they don't teach you anything in law school about how to operate, start, run, or maintain a business. Nothing. And when I went to law school anyway, it was basically the Socratic method, which in my opinion is the worst way to learn anything, especially the law. Most of what you learn, or that I learned in law school, and I'm sure my dean will shrug when he hears this, but had really nothing to do with the practice of law until I joined a law clinic in law school. And all of a sudden, overnight, I started to realize that I was working for what I imagined, because I'd never done it before, was a law firm. And it was a clinic in law school. And I was lucky enough, and I would encourage any law students to join a clinic if they can in law school. And law school education is progressive these days, and there are a lot more clinics than there were 30 years ago. But I got to see firsthand, how you had to manage clients, how you had to, obtain clients, and so on and so forth. But there's really none of that in terms of starting your own business. So you're really kind of on your own, and you learn quick when you want to survive. So what I did was I joined bar associations, networking groups, things of that nature, because really, at least in my profession and in many other professions, it's a matter of who you know, and knowing more people is just a good way, or a good opportunity to have more opportunities for people to potentially need your services. So, but thinking outside the box like that, and it doesn't even seem that intuitive, but it's important for people to realize that, something as simple as like going out occasionally and networking with people, and, having dinner once in a while with people that you don't necessarily know or are that in other professions. Lawyers are excellent referral sources for me, but I don't always like to go out and, just stay with the lawyers. I want to meet real estate professionals and financial professionals and anybody really from all walks of life, because everybody gets divorced, it's not limited to any sect, so it's just the more people the more connections you potentially have. And then to connect with, them, have your personalities connect with them is always important. So, you have to keep an open mind as any business person in terms of letting them know what you do and how you can help them or people that they know constantly. And again, it seems really kind of basic, but unless you're thinking about it, you're not always doing it. So that's really how I got started and got things rolling, and here we are.
I think you're absolutely right on the promotion part. I think a lot of people conventionally think that if I bury myself knee deep in books and study for long enough, I don't have to get into sales. I don't have to sell myself and feel uncomfortable, put myself in the position of getting rejected. However, in business, You are the biggest salesperson of your team. Whether you like it or not, you have to business, and different people generate it in different ways. So it's about finding what makes sense to you and what comes naturally to you and just doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. On that note, as far as your business goes, Jeff, how did you find the right people to work with and build the right systems to support your growth?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I love to answer questions like this. So let me just start by saying I only hire lawyers to work for me who are smarter than me. And my reasons are really kind of selfish because I want people around me that I'm going to learn from. I love to learn. I believe that you never should stop learning. And I feel that everyone's human. And the philosophy here at my firm, too, is that we learn from our victories and you learn from defeats as well. And there is such a takeaway from all of those experiences. It's really priceless. So I hire people that are absolutely brilliant, smart people, and I love to work with them, and I love to have them challenge me. I love to challenge them. I like to work through issues with them that are complicated and difficult. I like to argue with them about different issues that could come up in a case so that when I'm in front of a court or I'm speaking to an adversary, hopefully we've covered all of the different questions or issues that would potentially come up. And I've already been through them with my own associates, and we've had discussions about them. And it makes it much easier when, you're confronted with that question, for instance, from the bench, from the court, and the little light goes on and you sort of have a little smile on the side of your face. You're like, we already had that discussion. As a matter of fact, Judge, I am familiar with this, that, and the other, and this applies and that applies. And the facts in this case, are applicable to this situation because of that. And the law should be interpreted this way. And that's why my client should prevail, and so on and so forth. So it's great to have a staff that is smart and excited about the practice of law and likes to challenge me and likes to be challenged. And that really has been a recipe for success for us.
I love that. I think what you said, Jeff, about essentially radical transparency, right? Being humble enough to learn from people, being curious on what they say, and also speaking your truth and battle testing the ideas to figure out what is the closest truth that I can get instead of how do I prove myself right. I think a lot of people fall into that mistake. They try to prove themselves right in a discussion instead of figuring out, okay, you and I, let's figure out what the truth is together as a common goal.
Correct. And especially in the practice of law, there are a couple of ideals which we do strive for. Truth, obviously, is one of those. What some people sometimes even use interchangeably with truth is justice. To feel that you've somehow been wronged and that you're seeking justice is really just another way of saying, like, well, I really want the truth to come out. And of course, the truth may set you free. I mean, in reality, that's not always the case. In reality, in law, there are often more than one set of truths. As a matter of fact, in just about every case, there's really two sets, maybe three, and sometimes 100 sets of who believes what the truth is. And again, that's one of the great things about the practice of law. And I'm not a judge, but I certainly know enough judges, and I've been before enough judges to know that they have a difficult job because they are what we call the triers of fact. And those individuals who have taken that oath to decide cases have to decide who's truthful, who's lying and who's not. They don't always get it right. We'd all like to think they get it right most of the time. We have the process to appeal a case if you feel that there was something that wasn't done quite up to snuff or par, and that's probably a discussion for another day. But those are ideals that we all try to strive for. And certainly, as an attorney, you're always a proponent of the truth. We take oaths too as lawyers. Ethical oaths and obligations of lawyers require that we seek truth at all times, and we cannot be the proponents of any perjury or misstatements, and we certainly can't do that knowingly at all. And lawyers take that oath, I find, for the most part, very seriously. And that's really why the profession and the court system is in most cases able to continue the way it does. The rule of law is what really keeps societies together. And it's a way to adjudicate, your issues, your problems, your divorces, your disputes, rather than settling it in the streets, which obviously we all take the elevator down to anarchy if we don't try to stick with the rule of law.
Yeah,
Truth.
I love what you said. So I think what I just thought of when you said that is how in trials, right, you'll have two sides that one side just is obvious that he's wrong, like why would an attorney help that person out at all? But what you said is that everyone has their own version of the truth. Everyone has their own perspective. And so in a judicial society, they have the right to be heard, to have their truth heard, and then have a mediator, in this case a judge, figure out what the objective truth is, or at least as close as you can get to it. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And it's that judge who is called upon to make that determination ultimately. So when you do a hearing or a trial and the judge has to write an opinion, you'll see language in the opinion which really says exactly that I credit the testimony with this individual over that of the other individual. And maybe they'll cite to an inconsistency in the other person's testimony, or simply I've seen situations where I just don't credit testimony. That's another way of saying I don't believe it. It's not necessarily an accusation that someone's lying or not telling the truth. It's just that I'm afraid I don't believe it. Maybe your vantage point was, inaccurate. There are plenty of people who claim that they've experienced or seen something, and in their mind of minds and hearts of hearts, they really saw that. They're mistaken for whatever reason, and yet they still embrace what they believe to be their truth. And there are a lot of little nuances like that in the practice of law when you're trying cases or in the midst of hearings where the judge will have to make that call. So we need that position is very important, and we need that individual to be the tiebreaker, if you will, when somebody says it's black and somebody says it's white, and the judge has to come in and say, well, it's black, and here are the reasons why, and why I credit this testimony. Every once in a while, you get a case where the judge is like, well, it's not black or white, it's gray. So here's how we're going to split the baby, so to speak. You see that occasionally.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. And speaking of cases, I think this is a perfect segue into our second part of the conversation. Just your lessons from the front lines of relationship. What you've seen and what we can learn from it. What you've learned from it too. I think what kicks or what immediately comes to mind is like how does money, success, or ambition, change the way that people navigate divorce or custody battles or anything of that nature?
Sure. Well, I guess I would summarize that by saying that divorce is an extremely emotional experience for anyone. And anyone who is going through it and telling you that they're not somehow emotionally attached is either lying or has just been in such a bad situation for so long that they're already past that point. They probably should have addressed the situation a decade or 3 decades before. And I've seen situations like that. Knowing and understanding that it's such an emotional process helps a lawyer to approach a situation where you understand that people feel in divorce situations like they're getting screwed sometimes, for lack of a better way to describe it. And whether that's financially or through what they feel is not a good arrangement for the custody of their children. And obviously the enemy is your spouse. And, I'm exaggerating the terms somewhat. Believe it or not, occasionally you have an amicable situation where you have two litigants who are behaving reasonably well. But unfortunately, that is really the exception. Most of the time, people are very emotional and they're very upset and they're perceiving everything as a win or a loss. So, and that's looked at completely 180 degrees differently by both parties. So the New York State domestic relations law governs, for instance, child support. And there are individuals who just feel that the child support laws and the New York State Child Support Standards Act guidelines are unfair. They don't like the numbers. They don't like that they have to pay X amount of dollars. So if you have a situation where you've gone through a hearing or a trial or an amount of child support has been set for whatever reason, in most instances, I don't see a lot of people leaving the courtroom, waving their hands up in the air like, yeah, I'm paying $5,000 a month. That was a win. It's usually like, that's too much. That was unfair. That's not equitable. I got screwed, and the other side is, thinking, oh, I won. Or I didn't win, I didn't get enough. It's not enough. The laws aren't, designed to protect, me as a parent who should be receiving child support. They should be more, favorable or generous to me. So understanding as a lawyer, you have to explain what the state of the law is to your clients. And they are in a very high emotional state about that kinds of thing. And they are, usually looking at things from either I won or I lost standpoint. And, the best way to really get through that situation is to explain to your clients, this is the law. This is the state of the law. You really can't change that. These are the laws that are going to be applied to your case. And a good lawyer is going to be very transparent with his or her client right up front about the state of the laws and what you can expect. It's not always going to be resolved, in a certain way, but this is most likely what you can expect based upon your incomes and the numbers that, have been supplied in your tax returns and things that we use to make these types of calculations, whether it's child support or alimony or what have you. So be transparent with your clients, understand how emotional it is, explain the different scenarios to them up front. All that stuff goes a long way in trying to help your clients understand how really to perceive a situation. And if you do have a decision that you feel is not appropriate or unjust or not equitable, you've also discussed with your client that there are certain remedies, there are motions to modify, there are certain appeals that can be pursued, different ways to potentially change a situation. But again, be transparent with your clients so they know. With our clients, we always try to explain everything. I tell everyone, if you have unanswered questions, I'm either doing something wrong or you're not asking me questions. So I always like to end my meetings by saying, do you have any more questions? What can I possibly explain to you or go over that you don't understand so that I make sure that you really understand it quite well? Because I don't want you to have any questions when you leave here that you could have asked me. However, you certainly can go home and email me or call me or text me or send me a smoke signal, and I'm happy to answer those questions too.
That's great. And you touched on something that I think you mentioned earlier before as well. This is just about working together to the common truth, right? To explain to them this is the law, and obviously you have your perspectives, but we're navigating with the confines of the law here. Almost resetting their expectations so that it's not like I'm right because of this, this, and that. It's more so, okay, like what happened? Where can I bend? Where can I not? And obviously people will handle that framework differently. So how do you navigate through the tougher clients? How do you get them to a productive conclusion?
Sure. I would say the best way to deal with a more difficult client who might not be so trustworthy or truthful with you is to spend a fair amount of time going over the facts of the situation and explaining to that client that there are certain facts which we call facts beyond change, which you cannot change. And if there are certain facts that are not facts beyond change, which are maybe open to some interpretation, but there are certain facts that you just can't change. And, if you have a situation and it involves facts beyond change and the law is pretty clear about how that's going to be applied, you tell your client there is not a thing you can do about this situation with these facts beyond change that's going to change anything. And you can go and sit with 9 other lawyers and you're going to get the same answer unless you have an unscrupulous counselor. And if you don't, then maybe that's the lawyer you don't want to hire who gives you, oh yeah, hire me and I'll guarantee you some results, that sort of thing. When clients come into me, they're like, oh, and I met with this guy and that girl and, I'm deciding who to go with. And, so-and-so promised me that they could do this, that, and the other. The first thing when I hear that, I always say to them, oh, they're promising you results? You definitely want to go with them. Yeah, I can't promise you results. I don't do that. We manage expectations here and nobody can promise you results because, you just can't do that. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. Good lawyers don't do that. Anytime somebody promises you a result, run for the hills. There are too many uncertainties in this practice, and explain that to your clients that we're going to do the best that we possibly can. But at the end of the day, there are certain things that you just can't change, and those are facts beyond change. And manage that.
Absolutely. It's almost like, you're selling a product that you can't deliver, right? There's no such thing as a guaranteed result, especially in the realm of law, of conflicts, of things like that. So with that being said, like what sort of maybe blind spots do you wish, people saw coming?
So, well, like you said, you're selling a product that you can't necessarily deliver. That kind of gets back to you really can't promise what you're able to deliver in all instances. But what is important for a good lawyer to be able to promise, and I tell people who are looking to hire me that I can't promise you a result, but what I can promise you is that I will work harder than my adversary. I will be more prepared than my adversary. I will be more available than my adversary to speak with you and answer your questions. You will not have a situation where, your lawyer is not prepared next to you in court for anything that comes up. You will not have an inexperienced lawyer because we are all experienced here at my firm. And whatever we do, we don't send anyone to court who hasn't been there many, many times, either as a second seat before they're first chairing a trial or a hearing or a deposition. So what we can promise you is that we will work harder for you than anyone else. And that in most instances is what you want as an advocate on your side, because there are so many instances where you have people who aren't prepared and aren't giving their client the all. A lot of people who come to me will start by telling me that, like, I just don't have a good fit with my lawyer. I'm just not feeling, whatever it is, I don't feel that they're delivering so well. And, I try to understand what they're asking. And most of the time I do. I understand that they're feeling like they're not getting the attention. Their lawyers are maybe not giving the case, the representation, the attention that it needs. And, that's sad for the whole profession when I hear that kind of thing. So we don't have that up here.
Just final couple questions. What's something that, maybe people get wrong all the time, just about maybe your field, about maybe how they approach situations like this, and how would you correct their misconceptions?
Yeah. Well, that's an easy one for lawyers because we're the we're the brunt of so many jokes, so many lawyer jokes, and there's a lot of reasons that has come about, and probably the most significant reason for that is that it's an adversarial process. So, I'm representing a client who is at odds with someone else's client. So right from the get-go, the other client is not going to like me. And in many cases will develop, an aversion to lawyers because, oh, I hate my wife's lawyer or I hate my husband's lawyer. So right from the get-go, you're kind of halfway there towards hating lawyers, but I love my lawyer. You don't always hear that. But, there's a lot of sort of misconceptions about, lawyers just being like, sleazy and, ambulance chasers and so on and so forth. But my experience, and obviously I'm a lawyer, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I also think that I get a good look under the hood every day at lawyers. And I find that most in the profession, and I'm speaking mostly about matrimonial lawyers, which, is a particularly hated group because, again, you've got, an adverse client who just doesn't like what you're doing, doesn't like the rulings of the court that you helped bring about because you're the adversary. But I find that most of the lawyers in this profession, and I'm speaking, to the New York metro area where I know pretty much everybody and most people I would like to think know me, I find them to be a very courteous bunch of individuals who are overall general good people with good ethical and moral compass. For the most part, with some few exceptions, I find that the profession is very upstanding and respectable, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Glad to hear that. Yeah, so as we come to a wrap here, Jeff, well, thanks for all of your insights so far. And how can the listeners connect with you, maybe potentially work with you, or find out more about your firm?
Sure. The easiest way is to obviously check out our webpage, which is you can just Google J. Kaplan and Associates. We'll be the first firm that comes up. We're right here in New York City on 2nd Street. We offer free consultations for matrimonial and family law issues and situations. We can accommodate virtual meetings with individuals, virtual consultations, telephone consultations. We have a large office here on 42nd Street with lots of conference rooms. We can do in-person meetings, whatever you prefer. But really, it's just a matter of reaching out to us, having that initial phone call. And from there, we decide, is this something that we should meet together on and start to flesh out the situation so we can get your situation resolved in your favor.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I will let you go now. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next time.